Black woman denied her seat until the airline CEO recognized her as his boss. Imagine you're standing in an airport terminal, ticket in hand, exhausted from a week that felt like it lasted a year. All you can think about is settling into your seat, hearing the hum of the airplane engines, and drifting off to a well-deserved rest. But in a split second, everything you thought was routine turns into a tense confrontation. A gate agent blocks your path, questioning your right to be there at all. As onlookers exchange puzzled glances, the tension mounts until an unexpected figure steps into the spotlight. That's where our story begins, a tale of prejudice, hidden power, and epic karma. Ebony Marie Carter had been on more planes than she could count in her 38 years of life. As a highly successful entrepreneur and quietly the largest private investor in Delta Airlines, Ebony was used to airport lounges, first-class boarding, and the occasional nod of recognition from those who knew the weight of her decisions. Yet somehow, at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, on a particularly humid July afternoon, her status was nowhere to be found. She stood by Gate 17, wearing a sleek black pantsuit, paired with stylish but sensible heels. Her hair was braided down her back, and her posture reflected the poise she had sharpened during years of corporate negotiation. A small carry-on rested at her side, and a phone buzzed in her hand. The flight to Atlanta was delayed something about a late inbound aircraft, and Ebony found herself surrounded by irritable fellow travelers, all jockeying for position near the gate. But she took it in stride. Delays happened. She planned to catch up on a few urgent emails while waiting. What Ebony didn't plan on was the cunning gaze of a gate agent named Brenda, who wore her official Delta name tag with a kind of arrogant authority. Brenda was short, with curly auburn hair pinned back, and her eyes flitted between passengers, as though searching for any disruption to quell. When Ebony approached the counter to inquire if there might be a possibility of an earlier flight, Brenda's features instantly hardened. "May I help you?" Brenda asked, in a tone that indicated she didn't actually want to. Ebony offered her warmest professional smile, fully expecting a routine exchange of flight status information. Little did she know that seemingly ordinary conversation would set off a chain of events that would reveal the ugly side of prejudice and the extent of Ebony's own hidden clout. Brenda asked for Ebony's ticket, as if Ebony might have stolen it from someone else. The suspicion in her voice was subtle, but Ebony had navigated enough boardrooms to sense it immediately. Ebony brushed it off at first, thinking it was simply a busy employee having a rough day. "I'm booked in first class," Ebony said calmly, tapping on her phone to pull up her boarding pass. She rarely boasted about her status or influence within Delta. Her name didn't even appear on any public boards. She was one of those silent backers, powerful but mostly unrecognized. This anonymity usually worked to her advantage. She liked to see how the operation ran without special treatment. But now that anonymity was working against her. Brenda's eyes darted to Ebony's phone screen and then to Ebony's face, as if she was looking for a flaw or a discrepancy. "Sure, you are," she said under her breath, loud enough for Ebony to hear but low enough that anyone else might miss it. Amid the gate announcements, Ebony felt a flicker of anger but kept her cool. "Yes, I am," she said, her tone firm but polite. "The flight to Atlanta, seat 2A." Brenda's response was a measured blink, a quick swirl of the computer mouse, and a pursing of her lips. "It shows here you're on the wait list for an upgrade," Brenda announced, her voice pitched to carry. "You're not cleared." There was something borderline humiliating about the way Brenda said it, as if Ebony were trying to sneak into first class. Ebony reached into her purse for the printed boarding pass, which clearly showed seat 2A. Before Ebony could hand it over, Brenda waved her off. "I'm sure you have a seat," but you may need to speak with customer service if you want to dispute your upgrade status. Ebony frowned. Something wasn't right. She'd been emailed the upgrade confirmation days ago. She'd even checked in with it. I have a confirmation, Ebony insisted. It's not a wait list. It's a confirmed seat. Brenda said nothing for a moment, letting the tension hang in the air. Then she printed a new boarding pass and handed it to Ebony. Well, here is your new seat, 29C in economy. You can check with the main desk if you want to contest it. Next! Ebony stared at the paper Brenda had forced on her. A middle seat in the back of the plane. She didn't panic, but an uneasy feeling settled into her gut. She decided to step away from the counter for the moment. The flight was boarding in half an hour. Ebony had time to contact her personal assistant or speak with the airline's customer service. She resolved to do it calmly, no scene required. But as fate would have it, the scene was about to find her anyway. Ebony stepped to a quieter corner of the gate area and placed a call to her executive assistant, Clarissa. A capable woman of boundless energy, Clarissa was known for being Ebony's eyes and ears, especially when Ebony had to navigate corporate tangles. Ebony explained the situation briefly. "Are you serious?" Clarissa nearly shouted on the other end. "This is ridiculous. You have a verified seat. You even have the email from them, right? Let me see what I can do." Ebony forwarded Clarissa the confirmation, then scrolled through her phone to find any mention of the seat being changed or cancelled. Nothing. Everything still showed her original seat. While waiting for Clarissa's callback, Ebony reapproached the gate counter. She tried a different agent this time, a man named John. She explained her problem. He tapped a few keys, frowned, then looked at Ebony with confusion. "I see a note here that your seat was downgraded, but I don't see a reason. Let me check with Brenda. She's the one overseeing this flight." Ebony wanted to roll her eyes but kept her composure. She was used to dealing with corporate bureaucracy, but it was startling to watch it happen so blatantly in a public terminal. If she was just an ordinary passenger, she might have had no recourse. But Ebony had resources that most passengers did not. When Brenda finally deigned to speak with John, Ebony watched their dynamic. Brenda had a way of standing too close to John, dominating the conversation with hushed intensity, pointing at Ebony in the process. Ebony could almost feel the hostility from across the counter. Moments later, John returned, looking more flustered. "Please wait just a moment, Miss Carter. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding." Ebony folded her arms. "I certainly hope so." The line behind her had begun to form, and Ebony could feel the eyes of curious travelers. This was not the kind of attention she enjoyed. She was more comfortable in private negotiations, not in the public eye. The tension was mounting, and the countdown to boarding continued. Brenda came back, face set. "Ma'am," she began in a loud, clipped tone, "we've done all we can. The seat you claim to have had is no longer available. You can either accept the seat we reissued or wait for another flight." The calm Ebony tried to maintain was slipping, replaced by a tremor of indignation. She could no longer keep hidden. "I booked this seat. I was confirmed for it. I have no record of it being changed. And I deserve a valid reason for why it's being taken away from me." Brenda shrugged. "We can't always control last-minute changes. Perhaps the seat was double-booked, or the flight is overbooked." Ebony stared at her. Something told her this was more personal. The sharpness in Brenda's eyes, the way she seemed to relish Ebony's frustration, told Ebony everything she needed to know. This wasn't a random glitch. This was discrimination, subtle, plausible, but designed to push Ebony aside. Before Ebony could respond, a cacophony of announcements filled the terminal. "Attention passengers on flight 193 to Atlanta. We will begin boarding in a few minutes. First-class passengers and families with small children are welcome to board first." Ebony's phone buzzed. It was Clarissa. "Ebony, listen up," Clarissa said. I reached a contact in the Executive Resolution Department. They assured me you're assigned seat 2A. They apologized and said, there's no change on file. Something else is going on. I have them on standby to confirm this. Do you want me to patch them in? Ebony nodded, then realized Clarissa couldn't see her. Yes, absolutely. In that moment, Ebony's mind flickered to an even higher avenue of intervention, the CEO. A short while ago, Ebony and the CEO, Todd Ellison, had exchanged emails about an upcoming quarterly review. Todd Ellison officially reported to the board of directors, but Ebony, as the largest single private shareholder, carried significant sway. She had never used that weight for personal gains ever, but this might be the moment to rattle the cage if necessary. She decided to wait a few more minutes to see if the Executive Resolution Department could sort it out. Meanwhile, she tried to remain calm, ignoring the curious stares and the discreet smirks of Brenda. If Ebony had to guess, Brenda assumed Ebony was just some random passenger who had faked or fluked her way into a high-status seat. Brenda had no idea who she was messing with. Boarding began. First class was called. Several travelers in business suits lined up, handing their passes to Brenda. She smiled at them, joked with a few, and scanned their tickets with the beep of acceptance. Ebony hung back, deciding she didn't want to approach Brenda's checkpoint until she had confirmation in writing of seat 2A. A few minutes later, Ebony's phone lit up again. This time, it was a direct call from Delta's Executive Resolution representative, Diane. Ebony answered quickly. Miss Carter, hi, we've verified on our end that seat 2A belongs to you, Diane said. There's absolutely no record of a downgrade. I apologize for this confusion. I will immediately update the flight manifest to reflect your rightful seat. Ebony exhaled in relief. Thank you, Diane. Can you make sure the gate agent Brenda knows this? She should receive the notification on her system right now, Diane assured. Ebony hung up, gave it 30 seconds, then calmly stepped toward the gate to board with her rightful ticket. By now, the first-class line had almost finished boarding, but Ebony still expected minimal fuss. Brenda glanced up and saw Ebony approaching. Her eyes narrowed. I already told you, ma'am, you're not in first class, she said, crossing her arms. A couple of well-dressed businessmen paused behind Ebony, exchanging looks of uncomfortable curiosity. Ebony took a deep breath. MAAM, if you check the flight manifest again, you'll see that seat 2A is confirmed in my name, Ebony said, trying to keep the anger from her voice. She was a patient woman, but also a proud one who'd had to fight for every inch of success she'd ever known. She refused to be intimidated by Brenda's hostility. Brenda's expression didn't waver, but she turned to her computer screen. A beep or two passed. Then Ebony noticed Brenda's face pale slightly. For a moment, Ebony thought that might be the end of it, that Brenda, confronted with the truth, would have no choice but to hand over the boarding pass. Instead, Brenda pressed a button and said into the airport pass system, "Security requested at gate 17. Ebony's heart thudded. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the people in line behind her. The two businessmen took a step back, as though Ebony had become radioactive. Ebony parted her lips to speak, but no sound came out. In less than a minute, two airport security officers approached. One was an older man with salt and pepper hair, the other a young woman with a firm stance. Brenda pointed at Ebony. This passenger is trying to board illegally in first class without a valid ticket, Brenda declared. Please escort her away from the gate. At that moment, Ebony's composure nearly shattered. She found her voice again, though it quivered slightly with contained outrage. I have the ticket. It's legitimate. Diane from your Executive Resolution Department just confirmed it. Check your system. But Brenda stood resolute, her posture triumphant. We have reason to believe your seat was illegally switched. She actually winked, as if Ebony was scamming. Now, you can leave quietly. or you can be escorted out of the airport. The crowd behind them grew silent, the tension so thick you could slice it with a knife. Ebony felt the heat of many eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, some possibly scornful. In that instant, Ebony's mind traveled back through all the times she'd faced subtle, insidious discrimination, be it in an office, a store, or, yes, even an airport. She recognized this moment for what it was, a gross abuse of power by someone who saw Ebony's skin color before anything else. She refused to back down. "I demand to speak with a supervisor," Ebony said, meeting the security officer's glances. "I have proof. I'm not leaving." Brenda let out a theatrical sigh. "You're not in the right seat. That's final." And with those words, Ebony realized that the time for niceties was over. Ebony stepped aside, away from the gate door, to avoid blocking the flow of other passengers. The two security officers flanked her, one on each side, not laying hands on her, but making it clear that they could. The older officer's brow furrowed as he read Ebony's posture. She did not look like a disruptive passenger. Meanwhile, Brenda continued scanning other passengers' tickets as if nothing extraordinary were happening. The older officer, whose name tag read Officer Craig, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you can produce your documentation, we'll confirm and hopefully clear this up." Ebony nodded, grateful for a sliver of reason. She held up her phone to show the official message from Diane, which spelled out her seat assignment in black and white. Officer Craig leaned closer to read, and Ebony could see his expression shift to confusion. This looks legitimate," he said, turning to the younger officer. Just then, Brenda pivoted her head to where Ebony and the officers stood. "Security, we have a flight to board. Please remove her from the gate area." The finality in Brenda's tone rattled Ebony, but she remained steady. "That won't be necessary," a voice spoke from behind them. A tall, commanding woman in a pilot's uniform strode forward. Her name tag read Captain Ramirez. She carried herself like someone who had a lifetime's worth of experience in the sky. "I was informed there was a problem with the manifest." Brenda, unruffled, repeated her accusation. Ebony was trying to board in a seat that wasn't hers. Captain Ramirez turned to Ebony. "Ma'am, may I see your documents, please?" Ebony handed over her phone. Captain Ramirez scrolled through Ebony's confirmation, cross-referencing the seat information. Then she tapped on her own iPad, presumably accessing the internal flight roster. Brenda peered over the captain's shoulder, her jaw set like stone. Captain Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "C2A is assigned to Miss Ebony Marie Carter. There's no record in the system that it was changed." Silence blanketed the gate area. Ebony dared to hope it was over, but Brenda was not done. "Well, the system has been known to glitch," Brenda spat out, crossing her arms. "I had my instructions from a supervisor that this seat was not to be assigned to Miss Carter. That's all I know." Captain Ramirez regarded Brenda with a skeptical eye. "Which supervisor told you that?" Brenda looked flustered. She didn't name names, just repeated that she had received instructions. Ebony watched the captain's expression grow stern, as if she suspected there was no such supervisor's directive, but didn't want to escalate the confrontation in front of all these passengers. By now, Ebony's flight was fully boarded, except for Ebony herself. Some passengers who had boarded earlier peeked through the door window, uncertain what the hold-up was. Captain Ramirez sighed. "We need to push back in 15 minutes. Miss Carter, come with me, please. Let's get this resolved so we can depart on time." Ebony followed the captain toward the jet bridge, flanked by the security officers who still looked uncertain about the whole situation. Brenda, though clearly displeased, remained behind at the gate counter, scanning more final check-ins. As Ebony walked down the jet bridge, she tried to steady her emotions. What should have been a straightforward boarding had turned into a humiliating confrontation. But Ebony was no stranger to adversity. She had built her empire by forging ahead when the world told her no. In less than an hour, Ebony would be in the air heading home, or so she hoped. Once inside the aircraft, Ebony was greeted by a flight attendant named Grace, who gave her a polite, if somewhat strained, smile. The rest of first class was already seated, the overhead bins nearly full. Captain Ramirez gestured to seat 2A. "Please, Miss Carter, have a seat. I'll speak with the gate agent and ensure your baggage is properly stowed. We'll sort this out." Ebony nodded her thanks and settled into 2A with a sigh of relief. The flight attendant offered her a welcome drink, which Ebony politely declined. Her nerves were on edge, and she didn't want to add anything that might rattle them further. She texted Clarissa, finally seated in 2A. "We'll keep you posted." Clarissa replied almost instantly, "Glad to hear it. I'll monitor everything from here." Meanwhile, Ebony looked around first class. She recognized no one. Usually, Ebony would keep to herself, perhaps pull out her laptop to finalize some contract details. But an unsettling anxiety twisted in her gut. She wondered if Brenda had truly been acting under someone else's orders, or if it was purely personal bias. Ebony wanted to give Delta the benefit of the doubt. She believed in the company, even had a seat at high-level decision-making. Yet here she was, experiencing firsthand the kind of discrimination that was supposed to be a relic of the past. 15 minutes later, the plane's door closed, and Ebony prepared for takeoff. She put her phone in airplane mode, fastened her seatbelt, and leaned back against the plush seat. The flight attendants did their safety demonstration. The engines roared to life, and the Boeing 737 began taxiing to the runway. Ebony allowed herself a small smile of triumph. She hadn't been removed in handcuffs or forcibly bumped a coach. She had overcome the immediate crisis. But Ebony had no idea that the real turbulence was yet to come, and not from the sky. 30 minutes into the flight, Ebony tried to relax. She reviewed some emails on the in-flight Wi-Fi, ensuring her upcoming meeting in Atlanta was on schedule. The flight attendant came by to serve beverages and snacks. Ebony accepted a glass of water, politely declining anything else. Just as Ebony was about to dive into another email, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a tall flight attendant she hadn't interacted with yet. His name tag read Darren. He had a tight-lipped expression and handed her a folded piece of paper. Ebony stared at it, uncertain. "What's this?" she asked softly. Darren's gaze flickered with discomfort. "A passenger in coach asked me to deliver it to you," he said, then turned and hurried away before Ebony could ask more questions. Puzzled, Ebony carefully unfolded the piece of paper. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were these words: "You may have won this round, but watch your back. You don't belong here." Ebony's heart pounded. She looked around the cabin, but no one else seemed to notice. She had never received such a blatant threat before. It was disconcerting. Could it be Brenda who wrote this? But she was still on the ground. Could it be a passenger who had watched the commotion at the gate? Possibly. Ebony felt a chill crawl up her spine. She pressed the call button for a flight attendant. Grace came over. Ebony showed her the note. Grace's eyes widened in alarm. "Where did you get this?" "That other attendant, Darren, gave it to me, said it was from a passenger in coach." Grace's face hardened. "That's not acceptable. Let me show the captain." Ebony nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She dealt with hateful emails and online trolls before any prominent black woman in business has. Sadly, but this felt more personal, more immediate. She was in a confined space, 30,000 feet above the ground, with a potential harasser, or worse. Ebony's mind spun with questions. Should she worry about physical harm? Was it just a coward's note? Within minutes, Grace returned with Captain Ramirez following behind. The captain knelt by Ebony's seat. "I'm sorry you received this, Miss Carter. This is entirely unacceptable." We can't definitively identify who wrote it without investigating. However, I will speak to the lead flight attendant and see what we can do to ensure your safety." Ebony nodded, feeling her anger and fear churn. She had no illusions. Identifying the writer might be impossible. Still, Ebony appreciated that the captain took it seriously. "Thank you," Ebony said. "I'd prefer not to cause a disruption, but I'd like to feel secure." Captain Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on the seat's armrest. "We'll do our best to maintain a safe and respectful environment." "I'm sorry this happened on my flight." Ebony managed a small nod of gratitude, but her mind reeled. This was no coincidence. It was too connected to the fiasco at the gate. She wondered if the note was from someone who had overheard Brenda's accusations and concluded Ebony had somehow cheated the system. Or maybe it was a random bigot who couldn't stand seeing a black woman in first class. Either way, Ebony felt an undercurrent of malice. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Ebony closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She reminded herself that she wasn't helpless. She was Ebony Marie Carter, business magnate, investor, and a force of nature. She would not cower, but she couldn't deny the sense of vulnerability creeping in. The remainder of the flight was uneventful, at least on the surface. Ebony didn't receive any more notes, nor did any passenger approach her. Darren avoided eye contact as he passed by, while Grace tried her best to be attentive. Ebony spent the time mentally drafting a report she intended to give to Delta's senior leadership. She felt compelled to highlight this entire ordeal, both the blatant discrimination at the gate and the disturbing threat on board. As the plane descended into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Ebony peered out the window. She was relieved to see the familiar city skyline. Atlanta was a place of significance for her home base, the seat of her financial empire, and ironically, a major Delta hub. One final wave of relief washed over Ebony as the plane touched down safely on the runway. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Ebony gathered her belongings. She nodded at the flight attendants politely, still feeling a swirl of emotions she struggled to contain. Captain Ramirez stood at the cockpit door. As Ebony passed, the captain apologized once more. "Please accept my personal apology. I encourage you to contact our corporate office. This behavior from any Delta personnel or passengers is not tolerated." Ebony nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you, Captain." She appreciated the sincerity, but her heart was heavy. She knew that systemic issues ran deeper than one well-meaning pilot could solve. Ebony stepped off the plane, walking briskly up the jet bridge. She switched her phone off airplane mode and it buzzed with notifications. One text in particular from Clarissa caught her eye. "Call me ASAP." Ebony ducked into a quiet corner near the arrivals corridor and dialed Clarissa's number. Clarissa answered on the first ring, her voice urgent. "Ebony, something big happened. Todd Ellison, the CEO, found out about the gate incident. He's furious. He wants to schedule an emergency meeting with you tomorrow morning." Ebony blinked, her anger momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. How did Todd find out so quickly? "I called someone in the executive resolution department. They reported to him. Then it spread like wildfire up the chain. He's apparently livid that any investor, especially you, was treated this way." Ebony exhaled. "All right, let's plan on it. Have my notes ready." Clarissa's voice dropped to a softer tone. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, Ebony. But maybe this is the push needed for real change." Ebony hung up and made her way to baggage claim, steps brisk with purpose. She had a swirl of emotions, anger, hurt, and also a steely resolve. If Todd Ellison wanted a meeting, Ebony would make sure to detail every twisted second of the discrimination she had faced. Perhaps, just perhaps, something good would come out of this. But Ebony was about to discover just how wide-reaching the consequences truly were for Brenda, for the airline, and for Ebony herself. The next morning, Ebony prepared for the emergency meeting at Delta's Atlanta headquarters. She was not sure what to expect. She only knew Todd Ellison, the CEO, had called it with urgency. She arrived in a black luxury sedan, stepping out in a tailored grey suit that exuded authority. Her hair was braided neatly back, and her eyes held an unyielding determination. Security personnel in the lobby recognized her name and led her up to the executive floor. Ebony walked down the hushed corridors, lined with framed photos of Delta planes and historical milestones. Normally, Ebony's visits here were calm and discreet, focused on strategic planning or board matters. Today felt different. She sensed tension in the air, a heightened awareness of her presence. Clarissa was already waiting in a glass-walled conference room, laptop open, notes organized. Ebony gave her a grateful nod. "Thanks for everything you did yesterday," Ebony said softly. Clarissa's eyes shone with empathy. "Anything you need, Ebony, I'm with you." Moments later, Todd Ellison stepped into the conference room, flanked by two vice presidents. Todd was a tall man with a neatly groomed beard, known for his direct style and unwavering focus on Delta's growth. Ebony had always respected him for his business acumen and consistent emphasis on customer experience. Now, though, she'd see how he responded to an internal crisis that struck at the heart of the company's culture. "Ebony," Todd said, extending a hand, "I'm so sorry about what happened. You have my personal apology, and I assure you we're taking this very seriously." Ebony accepted the handshake, her expression unreadable. "I appreciate that, Todd. This was a disheartening experience, to say the least, but I want to see how Delta plans to address not just this incident, but the underlying attitudes that allowed it to happen." Todd nodded gravely, motioning for everyone to sit around the long conference table. He wasted no time. "We've launched an internal investigation. Brenda, the gate agent, is on administrative leave pending inquiry. We've interviewed the staff who worked Flight 193, including the pilot, Captain Ramirez, who corroborates your account." Ebony raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected them to move so quickly, but she appreciated it. "I also received a threatening note on board from someone in coach," Ebony said, her voice growing tight at the memory. "I don't know if that's connected to Brenda or a separate matter, but it was vile and explicit." One of the vice presidents, a woman named Sarah Lee, leaned forward. "That's deeply concerning. We'll do everything possible to identify the source, though it may be difficult. We'll certainly check any passenger manifests and see if flight attendants noticed suspicious behavior." Todd took a deep breath. "Ebony, this is a matter that goes beyond just you being a prominent investor. No passenger deserves to face discrimination. That's not what Delta stands for. We've always prided ourselves on our inclusive culture." Ebony locked eyes with Todd. Yet it happened, in front of a crowd. "So how do we fix this for the long term?" A moment of charged silence passed in the room. Todd finally spoke. "We're prepared to take decisive action. We've suspended Brenda. We plan to implement additional anti-bias training immediately. And Ebony," his voice softened, "I want to personally involve you in shaping these changes, if you're open to it, as an investor and as someone with valuable insight." Ebony studied Todd's face. She believed he was sincere, but she also knew corporate gestures sometimes rang hollow, if not backed by tangible follow-through. Still, Ebony recognized that, in the short term, Todd was making the right moves. "I'm open to it, but I expect real outcomes," Ebony replied firmly. "We can't just slap on a training session and call it a day." Todd nodded. "Agreed. We'll share the timeline for changes. Once the internal investigation concludes, we'll propose a new initiative that addresses the issue at its roots." Ebony felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps meaningful progress could arise from this painful ordeal, but it would take more than words. It would require accountability. real changes in hiring, training, and the way employees like Brenda could abuse their authority. As Ebony left the meeting, her heart was heavier than she liked to admit, but she also felt a surge of determination. She had spent years investing in Delta, partly because she believed it aspired to be a forward-thinking airline. Now the question was whether those aspirations would translate into authentic progress. Later that afternoon, Ebony was reviewing documents in her home office. She'd drafted a statement about her experience and was deliberating whether to share it publicly. The media had already caught wind of an incident involving a prominent passenger and a gate agent's mix-up. Ebony had no desire for the spotlight, but she also knew that shining a light on injustice could foster real change. Before she could decide, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered warily. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was a timid female. "Miss Carter." I hope it's okay that I reached out. This is Lisa from Delta's customer service department in Dallas." Ebony's first thought was that maybe Lisa had new information. "Go on," Ebony said cautiously. Lisa took a breath. "I'm probably risking my job here, but I overheard something yesterday from Brenda. I wanted to apologize on behalf of the staff who don't share her views. And I thought you should know." Brenda was bragging about how she'd finally put someone in their place. She specifically mentioned that you were a black woman who she believed had no business in first class. Ebony's chest tightened. Even though she suspected racism, hearing it confirmed made her blood run cold. "I appreciate you telling me this," Ebony said, voice steady. "Did you report it to your supervisors?" Lisa's voice grew smaller. "Not yet. Brenda's known to bully others, and she's friends with my supervisor." I was scared, but after hearing about the investigation, I realized I should come forward. "You deserve to know." Ebony thanked her for the courage to speak up. She assured Lisa that she would protect Lisa's identity as much as possible, but Ebony also urged her to report the incident. If the airline was serious about rooting out this behavior, Lisa's testimony could be key. Ebony ended the call, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't surprised by Brenda's actions, but part of her had hoped there was some less insidious explanation. Now, Ebony's resolve hardened. She decided she would publicly share what happened, not out of vindictiveness, but out of a desire to hold Delta accountable to its promise of inclusivity. Still, Ebony also braced herself for the public scrutiny and possible backlash that might follow. By the next morning, Ebony had carefully crafted a statement about the incident and posted it on her professional social media accounts. She omitted certain details for privacy, but made clear the discrimination she endured at the gate, the suspicious downgrade of her seat, and the threat she received on board. Within hours, Ebony's post went viral. Thousands of people commented, expressing outrage, sympathy, and calls for accountability. Major news outlets picked up the story, headlining it as "Black Woman Denied Her First-Class Seat, Delta Faces Backlash." Delta's corporate communications team released a brief statement confirming an internal investigation and promising zero tolerance for discrimination. But Ebony knew the public would demand more. As Ebony scrolled through the deluge of comments and messages, she saw a flood of support from other black women sharing their own experiences of subtle or overt bias while traveling. Stories of gate agents doubting their status or ignoring them for upgrades, flight attendants being dismissive, seat mix-ups that felt too convenient. Ebony's heart ached. She was not alone in this. Then Ebony saw a direct message from none other than Todd Ellison. He wrote, "Ebony, I realize the media swirl is intense. Delta acknowledges your statement, and we stand ready to make real changes. I'd like to speak with you again today, if possible. Let's accelerate our plan of action." Ebony replied that she would clear her schedule. This was her chance to push for serious change, not just lip service. Meanwhile, Brenda's own world was crumbling. After Ebony's story went public, Brenda was summoned to a hearing. Her job was on the line and she knew it. She called in sick, hoping to avoid the immediate fallout, but HR insisted she attend a mandatory meeting or face termination. In a cramped conference room, Brenda sat opposite an HR representative and her union steward. The HR rep had a thick file of complaints and eyewitness accounts, including Lisa's phone testimony. Brenda fidgeted, her confidence slipping. She had never been so close to losing everything. "You're accused of singling out Miss Ebony Carter for different treatment," the HR rep said. "We have evidence you deliberately changed her seat assignment without authorization, and then escalated the situation by calling security." Brenda twisted her hands. She was being disruptive. "I was following orders from a supervisor that the seat was flagged. It's not my fault if the system messed up." The HR rep frowned. "Who is this supervisor?" "We've spoken to your direct manager and others who say no such order was given." Brenda clenched her jaw, realizing she was trapped. She tried to pivot. "Look, sometimes these fancy business travelers get away with gaming the system. I was just making sure Miss Carter wasn't one of them." The union steward shot Brenda a warning glance, but it was too late. The HR rep typed furiously, documenting her words. It was clear that Brenda was on thin ice. Outside that conference room, the media storm swirled, public sentiment demanded accountability, and Delta's upper management was under immense pressure. For Brenda, the outcome looked grim. That afternoon, Ebony found herself back at Delta's headquarters for another meeting with Todd Ellison and senior leaders. This time, Todd introduced Ebony to the head of diversity and inclusion initiatives. A man named Michael Jordan, yes, ironically the same name as the famous athlete, but a very different person. Michael was an earnest, sharp-eyed professional who seemed genuinely concerned with building a more equitable culture at Delta. "We've been planning to expand and strengthen our diversity training," Michael said, after introductions were made. "But Ebony, your experience has shown we can't wait any longer. We need immediate action." Ebony nodded. "I've been inundated with stories from other passengers who faced similar bias. Clearly, the problem is more widespread than one rogue gate agent. We need to change the entire environment." Todd leaned forward. "I fully agree. Let's talk specifics." "We're prepared to implement a comprehensive retraining program for gate agents nationwide, with new protocols on seat reassignments, plus improved accountability measures. We'll also accelerate our approach to investigating discriminatory incidents. Currently, it can take weeks. We want a 72-hour max timeframe." Ebony liked the sound of it. "What about technology safeguards? If a seat is reassigned, there should be an immediate digital footprint indicating who changed it and why." Todd nodded vigorously. "Yes, that's already in the works. Our IT team can create a feature that sends an automated alert to the passenger if their seat is changed, along with a reason code. That way, no one like Brenda can do it under the radar." Ebony exhaled, feeling a semblance of relief. "Good, that will help hold employees accountable. Because if there's no transparency, it's too easy to blame a system glitch." She paused, then looked Todd in the eye. "I'm counting on you, Todd, to follow through. I might be a major investor, but I'm also a loyal customer. And right now, I need to see Delta live up to its values." Todd solemnly extended his hand. Ebony took it. In that moment, Ebony felt the heavy weight of not just her own experience, but the weight of countless travelers who'd faced indignities in silence. 2 weeks later, Ebony received official word from Todd Ellison. Brenda's employment at Delta was terminated. Internal investigations revealed a pattern of misconduct, especially targeted at passengers of color. Multiple employees came forward to say Brenda openly complained about certain kinds of passengers she disliked serving. She had manipulated seat assignments before, though perhaps never as brazenly as with Ebony. In addition, Ebony learned that the union steward eventually refused to defend Brenda further. Once the evidence came to light, Brenda was left with little recourse, and her termination was swift and final. Ironically, days after losing her job, Brenda also lost her apartment lease. With no income, she had trouble scraping together rent. Life came at her fast. This was, in some eyes, the hard karma Ebony's supporters claimed Brenda deserved. Ebony herself did not gloat. She believed that bigotry was a poison that often destroyed the hearts and lives of those who harbored it. Still, Ebony couldn't deny a certain sense of poetic justice. She had spent her life facing people like Brenda in one form or another. Finally, someone who tried to use prejudice against her was facing the consequences. One crisp morning a month later, Ebony was back at Delta's Atlanta headquarters for a high-level shareholder meeting. She walked into the executive suite wearing a tailored royal blue suit. Heads turned. Some recognized her from the news stories. Others, who already knew her status, whispered greetings. At the head of the long boardroom table stood Todd Ellison, distributing meeting documents. He smiled warmly at Ebony, then addressed the entire group of directors and major stakeholders. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge Miss Ebony Marie Carter, whose experience has helped catalyze vital changes in our company. He gestured for Ebony to stand beside him. Ebony obliged, feeling a swirl of pride and humility. Todd continued, "Some of you may be aware, Ebony is not only a passenger who faced an unacceptable situation, she's also one of our largest private investors. Effectively, in a manner of speaking, she's my boss. I, and all of us at Delta, answer to our shareholders." Ebony's voice carries weight, not just because of her investment, but because of her leadership and integrity. A ripple of applause went around the room. Ebony couldn't help but smile, recalling the day at the airport when Brenda treated her like a nobody who had no right to a seat in first class. Now the CEO of Delta was publicly acknowledging Ebony's status as his boss. Ironic, indeed. Yet Ebony didn't relish the recognition for ego's sake. She was there to ensure real progress. Over the following weeks and months, Delta rolled out new policies and training protocols. Ebony helped shape. And while Ebony knew no policy could eradicate prejudice overnight, she felt confident that the airline was making strides toward the inclusive, equitable experience it professed to offer. Months passed. Ebony continued traveling frequently for business, choosing Delta flights with cautious optimism. She watched for signs of improvement: a friendlier gate staff, more transparent boarding protocols. She noticed changes. Gate agents seemed more attentive and careful in seat reassignments, always printing fresh tickets in the presence of passengers, explaining any changes on the spot. On one particular flight from Atlanta to New York, Ebony boarded quietly in first class. An older black woman, who was also in first class, recognized her from the viral news story. "Thank you," the woman whispered as she passed by Ebony to her seat. Ebony felt a lump in her throat. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of gratitude from someone who likely had her own share of airport nightmares. Ebony nodded, returning a soft smile. In the months and years that followed, Ebony's involvement with Delta's diversity initiatives remained strong. She became a figure in corporate circles for championing not just good business practices, but ethical ones too. For Ebony, success was measured not only by profit margins, but by the everyday experiences of countless travelers, especially those who were more vulnerable to discrimination. The path to change was long, but Ebony walked it with purpose. She would never forget Brenda's smirk at the gate or the note that threatened her onboard. She'd use those memories as fuel reminders of why her voice and the voices of others mattered. Because, at the end of the day, Ebony Marie Carter was more than just a wealthy investor. She was a black woman who had fought for everything she had, and she intended to keep fighting not just for her rightful seat, but for the seats of countless others who deserved an equal place in the sky. And there you have it, a journey that started as a routine flight turned into a battle against prejudice, culminating in the CEO of Delta Airlines recognizing Ebony Marie Carter as not just a valuable passenger, but, in a sense, his own boss. The twists and turns brought public outrage, private revelations, and ultimate accountability. Through it all, Ebony stood firm, reminding us that even a single voice can reverberate through the walls of a massive corporation and spark real systemic change. If you found this story compelling, or if it resonated with your own experiences, don't let the conversation end here. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that shine a light on truth and transformation. Together, we can keep pushing for progress, one story and one seat at a time.